our partnership is an appreciation for me of what Dan can do, what he can do that I can't do, and what he can do better than that I can't do. And even just that he can do things, in some cases, he can do things that I can do, but he's doing them instead of me, and that's sometimes good. You know, that we can't be in two places at once. Yeah. We can be in two places at once because we can be in different places. So, you know, I think there's part of that too, but I think there's a general appreciation, not just with Dan, but with other people in the management group and at the company that there are things, I can't do all these things, so that if you're going to grow, if you're going to have a successful enterprise, you have to have people around you that can do things. And one of my greatest joys, I mean, we'll get into, you know, management piece of this instead of just partnership, but is when people do things better than I could do. I mean, that's sort of a secret kind of smile that I have, like, wow, that's great. It's nice to set the culture and kind of set the goals and everything, and then have somebody do something. Wow, I wouldn't have thought of that. I wouldn't have done it that way. They did that. That's better than, that I really enjoy. And I think if you're someone who can enjoy that,
right, then
it's good to be in a partnership. It's good to be in an organization. Right. You need all, if you're kind of, I don't know, sort of, you have, maybe it's credit avarice or something. You know, you want to hold all the credit to yourself. That's probably not a good role for you. You probably need to be in your own world and only let in who you have to.
Right.
But again, I think in my case, you know, in my case, it's just great to have someone I can appreciate his talents, and, you know, I'm the better for it.
And I think there, as you alluded to, there are real benefits to the company too, because it's not a cult of personality, and it's a more professional organization, and they see us relating to each other and understand that relationships are what built this business, and they better pay attention to their relationships as well. You know, we're both pretty big personalities, and it's just worked out well over the years that we've kind of carved out different areas of the business day to day where we can really spend our time and focus and our attention. But, you know, we have a great little room right between us, a little conference room where, you know, we'll just kind of meet up sporadically and during the day and chat about this or that, what are you dealing with, or what's, you know, bothering you, or it's, you know, anyone who's been in a good marriage knows it takes work, and it's not ever something you take for granted, but that when it works, it's absolutely fantastic. And I think, you know, the amount of fun that we have together at the business, and the relationship that we have, I have never had one smidgen of a lack of trust in Rich. And if someone were to say to me, what has to be the foundation of a successful partnership, it has to, in my opinion, it has to really start right there. It's, you know, you have to have absolute trust in each other. And boy, when you have that, I mean, the power of that, I think, can be outstanding, not only in the organization, but personally, as far as allowing you the freedom to do more things that you'd like to do, and you got some stuff covered on the backside.
Yeah, yeah. Because you screw up, I mean, inevitably.
All the time.
Right? So that's where that trust, it really becomes more than just a slogan, right? Well, like, what happened there? And so to me, that trust has many layers to it, and the most fundamental, in some senses, you really trust the intent of the person. You know, you know that they're kind of basic motivations. Because again, we make mistakes. We can't be 100% confident that what the other does isn't going to be a problem. Of course it'll be a problem. But that deep trust in the intent.
It can be it's a kind of building a little bit on what Rich said. It's such a great feeling, you know, when in the past in a smaller operation, maybe you felt all this on your own shoulders, and all of a sudden you realize, like, wow, we've got great people in the sales department. Adam's here tonight, for example, and it's like, oh, okay, I don't have to do that. Or there's people better than me out there doing that. And that's, I mean, my gosh, talk about the power of,
yes,
you know, it's kind of Jim Collins' the wheel, you know, you get it all turning together. My goodness, it's so hard to do it yourself. When you get, you know, 30 or 40 or 70 people all pushing it, man, you can really get that thing flying. And that's a fun and liberating point to reach.
Yeah, yeah. The comment you made, Rich, which was, to me, quite powerful, that the delight you take, just spontaneous delight in seeing somebody do something better than you can do. I mean, it's something that's very simple, but man, that's like the opposite of the person who needs to exercise their power to demonstrate they can do it. And again, I think the partnership must help that. I mean, it probably can really support each of you, really, as you both saying, you know, really appreciating what the other can do, which is a kind of a model of appreciating what other people can do. We haven't talked much about management practices, but it would be good to kind of to underscore just a few of what you think are the most important kind of cornerstones in how the company works. And, you know, obviously we make a big emphasis in these sessions on values and the culture and kind of the spirit of the enterprise, but you need skeleton as well as the spirit. You need muscles. You need the practices. So I think you guys have got a few of those that are pretty important for you, that kind of define how you really like to think of yourself managing in the organization, not just the two of you, how the organization manages.
Want me to go? You want to go?
Sure.
You know, a number of years ago, it's at least 10, so we're a 26-year-old company, we actually put pen to paper about, and I never really get the mission and the vision. I mean, it all kind of comes together, but it's things like that. You know, it's on one sheet of paper. And back, we started with an external vision and an internal vision, and the internal vision was kind of what the culture was going to be like at the company, external vision of what kind of a company we're going to be. And then we updated that about 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago. It took us a while to finish it, and kind of, you know, used a lot of the thinking of the Good to Great book, which I think is an excellent book, and so tried to put out what we believe in, and I'm not going to go through all of it because there's probably about 15, 20 things on the list, but you know, a couple of things you know, on that list are important, and you know, things like confronting the brutal facts. So that's an important internal management function.
Confronting the rule of facts.
Well, brutal.
The brutal facts.
Yeah, I mean, this is literally right out of the book, but
Yeah,
it's
okay.
part of our confront the brutal facts, which is you have a meeting, you have, let's say you have packaging inventory that's built up, that's costly, and you're not going to make the product again, and what happened? You know, do you kind of bury it in inventory and don't talk about it for 6 months, or do you deal with it and try to? So I think even since we've done that, I think we've done a much better job. I think we're really very, very good at confronting brutal facts, product facts, you know, mistakes. You know, one of my favorite sayings about mistakes is that part of our ethos is that help comes before blame. That's one that I wrote, and I kind of laugh about it, but I wanted it in there, which is help comes before blame, but the blame will come if we need to. If we need to come up with the blame, we will. But I mean, that's sort of a tongue-in-cheek. I mean, that's a very kind of harpoony thing to say. But I mean, I think that's one. And you know, the other is that we as a management group talk about every month about being on the bus or off the bus. Who do you want riding with you? With you on this journey every day, every month. And so we talk about people, and I think we've gotten a lot of our best accolades and criticism from people in other departments, because I think sometimes people will look at their performance with their immediate supervisor and then maybe with Dan and I, but not necessarily with some guy in the brewing department or some guy in sales, and that's really important. I mean, that's not it's not like anyone's unimportant like that. And so if that's the way you're treating a customer around another employee, well, that. Right. So I think that sort of thing is important. I think another a big external thing for us is to be good neighbors. And so I think it's always been important for us to be good neighbors, and so that has to do with our community service programs and you know, what we do from a charitable standpoint, and also what we are in our neighborhood right around the brewery and what we're like. I mean, again, to say you're a good neighbor and to throw a party for, you know, 17,000 people over the weekend and still be able to say that with a straight face takes some work.
That's right.
So, you know, you have to clean up, and you can't have people, because usually it's sort of like, oh, the party's over. No, and so I think all of that is important. But, you know, the first part of good management is hiring the right people and then training them. So hiring and training is a very important thing. And then I guess secondly, as we put in place a long time ago, having reviews twice a year. And I think the mid-year review is probably more important than the annual review, because it's not, you don't have the element of compensation hanging over it,
Right.
which is, when are we going to get to what my money is?
Right.
And so no, it's about, what are your goals? Do you like working here?
Right.
What are your goals for your career? Career development and opportunity development, and then issues you're having with your manager, issues you're having with anything. I mean, it's a much more open discussion. So I think that culture of openness is really important as well. So those are just a couple things. There's a lot of others. So
I think that,
Thank you.
not to bring the culture central here, but I think culture is absolutely central to management. And if, your culture has to reinforce your management every single day. And we do a number of things, we take great pride in our culture and feel that, we have a very strong culture. And one of the, the ways it works well for me as a manager is our culture will reject people. It doesn't have to come from
Right.
me saying, I don't really think that person's working out. It'll bubble up with people saying, you know what? We all bought into the hiring of this person, but he or she is just not working out. They didn't chip in at the event. They didn't do this. They're just not looking out for each other's back. They don't fit with the culture. So the culture will reject the person, which I think is great. And we have regular things during the year that kind of reinforce our culture and across the different departments, which is saying at this event this weekend, well, it's an all hands on deck thing where it's staffed by our employees. And they don't have to work. If you're in the sales and marketing department, you have to work for various reasons, but the rest of the company does not have to work. But folks are pretty strongly encouraged to work, and they want to work because it's a lot of hard work, but it's a lot of fun. And there's a gathering afterwards, which is really the central point of the year for folks getting together and having a nice time. And then the ultimate test of whether people work out or not is every spring we do an employee beer culture trip to Europe, where we take employees when they hit their 5th anniversary, 8th, 12th, and then every 5 years after that, we take them to Europe for a week, visiting breweries, drinking different beers, et cetera, et cetera. And, you kind of look at each other when now we'll start talking about next spring's trip and going through the list and saying, would you want to go to Europe with this person? And if the answer, if you're kind of like, gee, I don't think so, well, that kind of tells you.
I think we better do that when we get back.
Really good, yeah, the list. But that's another, cultural. And we're not saying people have to be out drinking. Absolutely not. We have people that don't drink who work for our company, but they're great people. They work hard. They want to be with us. We want to be with them, and it is in that sense like a family, which I think most strong cultures are like a family.
Yeah. Are there any particular management practices that you think are integral to the reinforcing the culture? Ways you track things. I mean, you talked about a few in terms of your review process. So how you do review clearly is pretty integral to how you make that culture real to people. What about kind of performance management stuff or improvement things?
I'll say on the side of the business that I run, the operations side in particular, I had a wake-up call a couple of years ago because we've done a lot of promotion from within. And we made some assumptions like, oh, he's or she's a great guy. She's done great in this job. Let's make her or him a manager. And that was really stupid. Being a good manager can be a very different thing than being a great employee or someone who can, work great on the filler and the bottling line. So as we've gotten big, we've had pretty significant growth in the last 5 years. And so we've now taken a step back and said, we really need to cultivate managers. We have great people that fit our culture who are very, very talented, and they're just not going to become great managers without us making that a real priority and providing them with the resources, the training, both internally and externally, to become good managers and making their management their absolute top priority, which we've tried to do.
Yeah. It's interesting, you see this phenomenon in sports so often. The best players are rarely the best coaches. Occasionally they are, but very, very often the great coaches were mediocre players. And when you ask them, you say, well, why is that? They say, well, I just had to really use my noodle a lot. I had to think a lot about. I had to really be oriented to how everybody else in the team was working, and so there really is a big step there. You know, being a good individual contributor does not qualify you by itself.
I guess I would add two things to this. One is that when we do have people who have been, let's say, particularly in sales, where somebody has been in charge of an area and now one or two people start to report to them, and you know the future may be 3 or 4 people. I do sit down with them and say, you know, or often I'll say, so how is it having such and such reporting you? And say, well, and I try to gauge how much of a kind of an annoyance factor there is. And I say, you know, the interesting thing is when, you know, I started to have more people reporting to me, I often had the thought, wow, once I can get through all of this communication, which was different back then because it wasn't text messaging and emailing, but once I can get through all these communications, then I can start doing my job. And I said, what you have to realize is now that you have these even 2 people, even 1 person, but 2 people reporting to you, that is your job. So you might also manage yourself, kind of player coach, but the coach is in charge of all these players. So you know, making them better is your job. And once you get that through your head, it sometimes can be kind of a relief, because I think you're so wired to being a performer in your task list that you're kind of like, well, I got to get rid of all this so I can do my task list. But you realize, no, you have a new task list. And I think that's an important thing. I think the other thing, one of my favorite kind of management sayings is, and I don't remember who said it, so I mean, it may have been one of your books, but you know, is don't manage by ESP. And I think, you know, in all relationships, business and personal, I think there's a desire that people have, and certainly I have had, and I think I'm mostly given up on all of this, but is to have people read my mind and kind of want to know by osmosis what I want or
Why didn't
think.
you guess what I had in mind there, right?
That's right. And so, you know, I'll leave the personal life stuff out of it, but in terms of business life, that's not something that we advocate for our people. Don't manage by ESP. Have clear idea, you know, and go through that go through it a couple times.
Yeah.
Let it sink in what you're trying to accomplish and why, so that you are able to give people a way of operating that is in concert with what the company's trying to do. And that's really the fundamental part of our job, is to be very clear about that with people. So I think not managing by communication, not by ESP is.
Yeah. And you have to be pretty persistent too, because, you know, the corollary to that is it's actually not what you say, it's what they hear.
Wow.
Right? That's life, right? It's not what I said, it's what they heard. So where there's gaps there, you just got to kind of stay at it so those gaps can get closed enough that you really feel you're aligned.
Well, it reminds me, when we teach people about brewing, not our brewers, but our sales and marketing people about beer appreciation and brewing, I always say to them, you know, we look at it from in different ways to try to get the understanding. Because when you tell people about beer tasting and beer making, it sounds kind of simple, like they'll get it. And then you say, well, repeat it to me. They get tongue-tied and it's very difficult. So by actually brewing on the brewing floor, by reading, and then by talking about it and looking at the materials, by doing all those things, we're able to have different perspectives, and they get it. At the end of 6 weeks, people are really very much more comfortable with talking and understanding the brewing process. So I think that's right. That's repetition. It's like, look, you're not going to get it the first time. We're going to repeat it, and then you'll be very comfortable with it.
That's great. Well, obviously, we could keep going here for a long time, but we do want to open this up and invite all of you in to, whether questions, comments, things that struck you, things you would like to see us all explore a little bit further, any of the above. Please, if you don't mind just standing, it'll be a lot easier for us to hear you.
I think what you touched on at first, but I didn't see it go into the detail. The hard times that you had, when you had to confront yourself, individually.
Is there a mic you have that you're waiting? Excuse me. Would you mind using that? I'm sorry, I should have said that right at the beginning.
No,
so
it's quite all right.
everybody can hear.
The question that I had was the times that you really had to confront either yourselves personally or as co-founders, a very difficult decision you had to make personally that in order to instill the culture still within the organization, where you really had to hit a hard wall.
I can think about, in particular, there's one case with an older gentleman who had been an absolutely outstanding employee who worked harder than anybody else that we had at the company and played a key role for about a 7-year stretch at a very important time in our business. And he was one of the smartest guys I've ever met, as far as he was in the maintenance and repair, and he could install, and he was absolutely amazing. But you know what? His interpersonal skills were not that great. And over time, they became more of a problem. And he really was mistreating people, as it turned out. And I let it go on for too long. And most personnel decisions I find, the one constant in my life is I should have done it sooner as a manager. It's like, we have the saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. Once you see smoke, make the decision and move on it. And that was an example because he was a very big character, and he probably ended up driving some people away from the business, and it was my failure as a manager because the good I thought outweighed the bad. Mm-hmm. And you really should never get down to that kind of a decision, to a weighing. I mean, people have to meet your standards on all facets of their performance, right? And you can't have a culture where, well, gee, he's an outlier. He's allowed to mistreat people because
he's so good at X.
Because he works 16 hours a day, and you can't do that. And confronting that was difficult, but I fault myself for not having done it sooner.
I'll give one story from probably the darkest era of the company. It's 1991, 92, and there were 10 of us there. We had cut back, we had sold our bottling line, so there were 10 of us there, and things weren't going well, and I forecast out kind of our cash flow. I mean, back then it was to the day. I mean, it was a daily cash flow exercise, survival exercise. And it was clear that we didn't have enough to pay all 10 people. So I got a meeting together, and I said to everybody, tell you what, we can either all take a 10% pay cut, or we can let one of you go, or one of us go. I mean, I guess I sort of assumed it wasn't going to be me. But we can either let one of us go. I probably said that. I mean, and so we voted for a 10% pay cut, and we did it. And then later on, we restored it. That was a pretty serious meeting. The people in that room remember the meeting.
I'm sure.
Today. And two of them, one's the head of brewing operations, and one's our CFO, who were, 22 and 23 at the time. So, that it wasn't just, the funny thing was, I was going to say about that era, as Paul was talking about the pens, I guess just to kind of update that, we don't do that now. The pens thing is sort of part of the lore of the company. We don't buy pens. But we didn't buy anything now because we couldn't. So, it wasn't just the pens. It was the legal pads, and we were like locusts. We clear stuff out. But we kind of had to. It was like a law firm. It was like, well, it was kind of part of the benefit, part of the perks of paying $300 or $400 an hour or something was at least we got, we didn't have to go to Staples. So that was out of necessity. So I think
still don't buy pens.
No, but that's what I'm saying. We still don't buy pens. So I think you learn a lot by necessity. So that was one of it. The by necessity stories are countless. I mean, that's.
Yeah. Well, they also are where a culture is formed. As you say, nobody in that meeting forgot that meeting. Right. Those are the significant emotional events of an organization.
Right.
Like for our personal lives, we do remember those significant emotional events, and how you do things in those moments usually shapes a culture.
Well, one phrase that always got me in this vein is it's interesting that I still reflect on is the term doing something right. And, you know, different people have different viewpoint about what it is to do something right. And that might be the way you know, the equipment you have on your bottling line, or it might be what your tour room looks like, or it might be, you know, having company cars for your employee. And to me, it was always interesting because we were so much about survival. It was like, okay, you know, doing things right in the way that people usually use that, and the people usually saying that, is from the standpoint of abundance.
Yeah.
Not from the standpoint of scarcity. And so scarcity management is a completely different ballgame. Doing things right is staying in business. It's living another day. It's, you know, having enough, using your bullets wisely so you don't run out of them, and you're well, I'm sorry, we did our best. Well, and so I think that's an interesting thing too. So my view of doing things right is living another day. And you know, we were able to do that, and I think those are certainly as proud days for the company as today is.
Yeah. I can't resist. I'm going to just make a brief comment here because I always like bringing in, where it's appropriate, some of Bill's key ideas. One of Bill's core values that he really worked for his whole career, in Hanover particularly, on was what he called leanness. And actually, of all the kind of core values, was probably the one that was in some ways the hardest to understand. You just articulated it beautifully, so I can't resist just pointing out how important that was to him. And, you know, in some sense, it's very simple. I know when I grew up, one of the phrases I always heard from my mom again and again and again, waste not, want not. And there was something inherently wrong in wasting. It has nothing to do with how much money you have, or how much abundance or scarcity you have. Because when you have scarcity, it's a survival requirement. But companies grow out of that and get to a point where they no longer have that kind of orientation. You know, if you look at every single thing, like, if I had to make this decision with no abundance, would I make this decision? That was kind of what he was after. And he used to say that the toughest times, the most dangerous times, are when you're in an upturn. Because when you're in an upturn, it looks like you can do all this stuff. But in fact, what businesses often do is do things which then cause the subsequent downturn to be much worse than it would have otherwise been, because they weren't practicing leanness in the upturn.
Or governments.
Or governments. Or anybody. I mean, it's a real principle.
Yeah.
When you really get that, you go, boy, the times that are most dangerous are when things are going pretty well, because you totally lose what he would call your value of leanness.
It's also tough to make the judgment call about when to invest properly, because when when you get out of complete scarcity mode, now you've got instincts, but then you have to make those decisions. I mean, for example, something much less frivolous than pens. Dan and I, neither of us have a personal assistant. So if the company doesn't have a receptionist. So, it's the little things like that that are carryovers from yesteryear, where we could, if that's something that people might think, wow, that's crazy. What? We just don't. I mean, that's sort of, in some ways those are, and you have to decide whether that's a good way to use our time or not. But I think we do make those decisions, so.
And, getting back to the culture, you have, we have employees that have come from other breweries that are not run the way we're run. And they go through boom and bust years, and they, have questions of survival, in these days. And I think they come and, again, it gets back to communication to some extent, but there's a reason why we do what we do. It's part of our nature, but it has led to a more successful, sustainable business with the resources to invest in facilities and people and kind of a long-term growth trajectory that a lot of these other, companies have not. And for employees, and you can't take this for granted that young people, we have a lot of young people that work for us, get this, but it's pretty nice to work for a stable company. Because there are a lot of unstable companies out there where you aren't worrying about the ethics of management, or they're going to be around in a year. And most of our people, I think, really do get that. It's like, gee, you know what? This is and it's right in our profit statement, our mission statement about we want to run a successful, profitable business. And we put that word right in there, and if people don't understand, if our employees don't understand why that's important, well, we need to explain it to them. We're not a charity. You know, the way the accounting works, if you don't have a profit, you're not gonna have money to invest in equipment and other things to grow your business. So putting that right front and center